Now, this one is titled Crying During Every Conversation. That is the mother-in-law, by the way. Quick backstory. Husband and I have been together for over 10 years. During that time, I never had phone calls with my mother-in-law, and we saw each other a couple of times a year. Husband always talked to his parents every week or two, but also rarely saw them in person. Then we got pregnant and mother-in-law started calling me multiple times a week, constantly pestering me for updates on baby, driving me crazy, trying to insert herself into every bit of planning, from nursery design to baby gear shopping and decision making. She was always telling me how anxious she was and worried about baby and just couldn't wait for him to get here. I finally exploded one day and told her that I was too anxious myself to deal with her anxiety and basically would tell her what she needs to know about my pregnancy, which is little to nothing. But that I didn't have the capacity for much more. It was a blissful few months of basically no calls. This brings us to the present, just a few more weeks till the due date, and mother-in-law has amped up her call frequency with both my husband and I. Every time she calls either of us, she ends up in tears, literally babbling, crying about how excited she is. She can't handle having to wait any longer, doesn't know what to do with herself, cannot stand the thought of us having her wait to meet him after he arrives. We set a boundary of at least a week postpartum for just us to heal, bond, acclimate, establish breastfeeding. And I'm not even referencing her talking through tears. It's like a straight sobbing, gasping for breath, unable to form complete sentences. I understand she's excited for her first grandchild, but I am at a loss at how to handle her emotions. It's overwhelming, unnecessary, and quite frankly unfair that she's prioritizing her insane excitement and not even asking us how we are. She's so hyper-focused on herself, we can hardly get a word in because she just calls us expecting to let her carry on ranting and for us to just be a listening ear and shoulder to cry on. Husband has done so well respecting boundaries for us, but now that his mom is so emotional, it's like she's manipulating him into feeling bad for her. I am frustrated and so over it. This is a really interesting case. I think that, honestly, I would have no patience for this mother-in-law either, to be completely honest. I want to think a little bit like, I always try to think a little bit from the other side of the situation. So maybe from her angle, it's something like she's just super excited, but honestly, it just sounds like she does not know how to regulate her emotions to a normal human level. And that's a little bit strange as a response to a grandchild. In general, having a grandchild is a little like, I kind of understand a little bit this idea of having a grandchild is a little bit like having a child, and it allows you to relive the emotions that you went through when you were a parent, because now you have a kid again and you can spend time with them and you can bond with them, and all of these feelings are really intense for a lot of people. And, you know, as an example, when we announced our pregnancy to my in-laws, my father-in-law actually teared up, and it was the first time that I've ever seen him get that emotional about anything. But there is a kind of a time and a place for it. It's kind of strange to me that the mother-in-law was super, super, super anxious about the pregnancy to begin with, and then really injected that a lot into the daughter-in-law. That is in and of itself not a healthy relationship. Like, it's already hard enough controlling your anxiety as a pregnant woman. Having someone else shove even more anxiety on top of that is not helpful, and shows that she was very much concerned with herself, which OP also says. And then the response now of, okay, now we're the baby's almost here and she's really intense. Honestly, I would just sit down and really talk to her about it, and say, I would interrupt her and say, look, I know that you're really excited about the baby. I'm really happy and excited for the baby too. And I really hope that you can have a really good relationship with him and spend lots of time with him. But the emotions that you are exhibiting here are very intense and very hard for us to handle and very hard for us to manage. And if you could tone it down just a little bit, that would be really helpful. I don't know to what extent they've properly sat down and talked about it, because it sounds more like they've just been bowled over by this wave of emotion that comes from the mother-in-law, and they kind of just sit there and like experience it. And that's obviously not good either. So yes, that's how I would deal with it. Honestly, if the husband is feeling bad for her, then I would probably tell him, look, I understand, and I would also, like, I'm happy to help her and I'm happy for her to be a part of his life, but that there should be limits and there should be restrictions, and it's not our responsibility to help her regulate her emotions. She's a grown adult woman. She should be able to do that all by herself. I see a lot of people like, hey, you need to set boundaries with her. See her once a month. If she doesn't bother to see you before the baby, she shouldn't expect to see much of you now that there is a baby. I always think that this is a really cruel thing that people say. It makes a lot of sense to me why, when you're an adult child, you don't need to spend a ton of time around your parents, and you don't need to see them that often. You don't need to engage with them that often. But it also makes sense to me that they would want to be a little bit more involved in in their grandchildren's life, that they want their grandchildren to also think that they, to develop a relationship with them, to remember them, to know that they exist, and to spend time with them. It makes a lot more sense to me that you would want to invest more time in a relationship with a child when they're still very young versus when they are grown adult people who have their own lives, who have their own concerns, who are very independent and self-sufficient and don't need so much help or support. So I always find it a little bit sad that people immediately jump to, yeah, okay, now you need to separate them, and she doesn't need to expect a relationship with her kid, with her grandkid even. The next comment says, first, block her from your phone. Your husband can deal with this crazy. Second, have him tell her that if she can't control herself, or will be much longer than a week, it will be much longer than a week before she meets the baby. I can't imagine what she'll be like the first time she meets the baby if she's acting like this already. You do not need this mess while you're trying to bond with your baby. I guarantee she'll try to take over all aspects of your baby and will cry when she doesn't get her way. Your husband needs to shut this down. This craziness is the last thing he should be concerned about right now. And yes, the husband does need to shut this down, but I always find it strange that people will equate this type of behavior and this type of excitement with immediately inserting yourself into all circumstances. I don't think that has to be the case. Yeah, you don't need this mess. Yeah, she doesn't need to be completely in your face, but maybe I guess it's possible that she'll see the baby, she'll calm down, she'll understand that the baby's just going to be asleep, and then that there's going to be a long, long life ahead, hopefully, for the baby, and lots of time available for her to bond with the baby, and then maybe she can take it a step back. I think blocking her and so on is a little bit extreme, but I would definitely try to cut down on the phone calls a little bit. It's completely fine to be like, hey, you know what? We don't need to talk this often. There's not much that's changing about the baby and our readiness and so on quite this often. It's easier to distance yourself if you're explicit about what you want and what you need. And if you just explain it a little bit to her and take a step back, and then you don't need to freak out so much. And then the next person says, just based on how irrational she's acting, I would make her wait longer than 1 week for your sakes. Yikes, mute her calls and texts if you can. Pretty much everyone says just cut down, and I don't even disagree with the part of cutting down, but I think you can talk to her and then you can set boundaries, and both of those are completely fine. Like, you don't need to completely freak out and say, hey, okay, she does not need to be a part of our life at all. You can just be a little bit calm about it. That said, if you're a grown adult woman and you still can't regulate your emotions when you're interacting with people, that's a problem, and you should probably work on that. And I would be weirded out if this is the only situation in which she's a little bit strange, because that doesn't make any sense to me. But what do I know about having grandkids, right?